So I have a great pleasure in regarding this seminar which we are organizing today, the webinar Philosophy, Science and Values. We have Professor Bhagat, Chairperson of Center for Philosophy. He will be joining. He's actually busy with the NTA meeting at the NTA office, but he has spared time from that place to give the welcome address. Professor Bhagat, you can now join and
yes, sir.
give the
yes.
welcome address.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Singh. I'm little far away, not in the campus, but I would like to join the entire proceedings, provided the signal is intact. So we are very happy today that we are able to organize this International Philosophy Day, which normally is organized in November, December of every year. But somehow uh, this has been delayed because of the COVID, and we are able to do it only this year. So I'm very happy to welcome all of you, Professor A. Raghuram Rajuji, Professor Balram Singh ji, Professor S.S. Prasad ji, and Professor Alex Henke. So all four of you have very kindly agreed to be part of this discussion, a symposium. And we are also very happy that thanks to Professor R.P. Singh, that Center for Philosophy is organizing this program in collaboration with School of Indic Studies and the Institute of Advanced Sciences, Dartmouth, USA. And for that, especially Professor Balram Singh ji, you had been very kind. And I hope that we will have a few more programs together in the coming months to go. So without taking much more time, let me also welcome all other dignitaries here, all other faculties of the center and also from JNU and outside who had been very kind to join this program, and also our own students and others who had assembled today in this online platform. So I will not take much more time. I am very keen to listen to each one of you. So Professor Singh, so you can please kindly go ahead with this program. You will be introducing the themes, right?
Yeah.
So thank you once again.
Thank you, Professor Bhagat. In fact, I'm getting so many WhatsApp messages that the link is not working with them. There are around many such people. So I've just forwarded the new link. I don't know, something went wrong with the old link which was given to us. So, but anyway, may I request Anuja also to start recording this episode, this event.
It's already being recorded.
They will gradually join all the people here. So thank you, Professor Bhagat, and for giving the brief welcome address. And I will take only 10 minutes time to give a brief introduction of the theme. The theme is philosophy, science, and values. The discipline known as philosophy in English language and darshana in the Sanskrit-rooted languages is often mistakenly thought to be abstract and unworldly, as if these have little or nothing to do with the world of sense and science. The distinction between abstract and concrete, common sense and science, philosophy and science is a matter of degree and not of kind. The world of experience may be studied in detail and also under the aspect of some principles or laws. While philosophers, generally speaking, use the terms like concepts and categories, scientists prefer such expressions as laws and theories. The categories of philosophy and the laws of science are instantiable and concretizable. Philosophy can be regarded as an inquiry by way of logic, reasoning, and dialectic from what is better known to what is less known, and then from general principles to particular conclusions. Science, particularly natural science, is an experimental inquiry into laws and operations of nature. With the observation of reality in terms of what regularly happens, the common characteristics are identified and these are regarded as the normal. This in turn is considered as the standard or the ideal or the principles, laws, etc. Both philosophy and science question the myth which is which a community has formed on the origin of the universe, human beings and their good, etc. on the one hand, and construct theories, principles and laws, etc. on the other. It is at this stage that values are introduced for human conduct in terms of what is good, right, virtuous, etc. Philosophy needs scientific foundation to give a deeper and a more correct explanation of natural and social phenomena. Science also needs philosophical justification to relate and evaluate the technological products and scientific theories with the cultures and values on the one hand, and with the aspirations and goals of the people on the other. It could be a system or a tradition of teaching and learning, transfer of knowledge from one individual to another, from one community to another, from one generation to another. In the writings of seminal thinkers like the Vedic seers and the epic poets belonging to different civilizations, the discerning scholar can easily discover not only high philosophy, but also the first principles of theoretical knowledge and of practical life. At a more professional level, the historians of ideas finds in the works of Plato, Descartes, Kant, and Russell in the European tradition, and those on Dharma Shastras, Arthashastra, Sankhya Yoga, Nyaya Vaisheshik, and Vedanta systems in the Indian tradition are present a critico creative synthesis of theoretical ideas and their practical application. Careful reading of these works makes it very plain that they were well aware of their civilizational backgrounds and historical uh, context. Context. Since they express themselves in the idioms of their time, often through symbols, metaphors, and aphorisms, the logical scientific mind of the modern age fails to grasp their intended meaning and practical implications. Aristotle's division of sciences into theoretical, practical, and productive, Kant's division of human experience into science, morals, and art, Sri Aurobindo's attempt to integrate Vidya, Sadhana, and Kala give us the vision that philosophy, science, and values are integrated and integral parts of human edification, wisdom, culture, and civilization. We are required to be comparative and critical. Today's international webinar is aimed to explore this possibility. Now, to explore this possibility, we have the first speaker, Professor Raghuram Raju, and he did his PhD from IIT Kanpur, and then he joined University of Hyderabad, and he taught there for fairly long time, and then he shifted to IIT Tirupati few years back, and he's the author of many landmark books in Indian philosophy and also on Western philosophy, and his specialization is very wide ranging, including continental philosophy, bioethics, feminism, social and political philosophy, technology and society. And these days he is very passionately involved in writing a monthly column of the daily newspaper, The Telegraph, just I think 2 or 3 days back, I read one of his articles which came up in the Telegraph. I'm a regular reader of it, that Descartes and Ambedkar's roads to modernity, different departures, and a very serious comparison has been made between Rene Descartes, the father of modern philosophy, and Ambedkar's ideas. And of course, there are points of divergences between the two. So, uh, may I now invite Professor Raghuram Raju to give his lecture? Sir, over to you.
Yes. Thank you very much, Professor R.P. Singh, for this kind and generous invitation to speak today. I also thank Wainambad for this invitation. It is Sir C.V. Raman, on the occasion of receiving the Nobel Prize, said that he is receiving the Nobel Prize on behalf of a nation that does not have a flag of its own. Now, speaking today in the platform of International Philosophy Day, I feel slightly in the similar mood to speak on behalf of a discipline which is not recognized as it should have, and that is modern Indian philosophy. So I want to take off from here and then present the larger context and then locate the contributions and unenvelope the possibilities that are available in front of us, which have not been traversed as much as they should have been. So I wanted to begin by with this begin this presentation by identifying three important moments in the writings of Krishnachandra Bhattacharya. The moment of inheriting the past with responsibility, the moment of emotionally reacting to the colonialism which is around him, and the moment of presenting in a creative way his cognitive competence. This is the general theme that I wanted to present before you. Let me point out right in the beginning that there is a difference between doing Western philosophy, doing classical Indian philosophy on the one hand, and doing modern Indian philosophy on the other. If you are doing classical Indian philosophy or Western philosophy, you have ready-made material, though in varying degrees, before you. So you start working with the material that is there and study the material very thoroughly, and then you contribute new ideas to the existing ideas. That's how the works, on these themes go forward. On the contrary, the scene is different in the case of those who wanted to do modern Indian philosophy. They have to face, right in the beginning, the lack of ready-made material. What I mean by this is, if you are doing either Western philosophy or classical Indian philosophy, you have the examples in front of you. Plato was dealing with pre-Socratic philosophers. Descartes was dealing with Greek metaphysics and Christian theology. Kant had Hume before him. Marx had Hegel and things like that. And in India, you have Badarayana, who was compiling Upanishads in the form of Vedanta Sutras. You have Gaudapada, who was comparing Vedanta with Buddhism. And then you have Shankara dealing with Buddhism and Vedanta the earlier time. So there is this scene that is largely set in front of you if you are doing either Western philosophy or doing classical Indian philosophy. The scene with regard to doing modern Indian philosophy is different. The predicament of doing philosophy in modern times needs the researcher or the scholar to make the material ready. So I make a distinction between ready-made material and making the material ready. There is a need to claim to right in the beginning that there is philosophy in the modern time in India. There is a need to establish that there is philosophy in India today, not just in the classical times, and not merely present it and not merely translate classical text into English or other languages, but there is an imperative need to restate Indian philosophy in the modern idiom. And that is the very, very difficult task, to restate Indian philosophy in a modern idiom so that you are able to communicate to your adversaries, both from the outside as well as within India. So this is an arduous task, and this is what distinguishes doing modern philosophy from either doing classical Indian philosophy or Western philosophy. So what is the further difference between these two kinds of activities that I have distinguished just now for you? The second activity requires or demands mastery of classical Indian texts, mastery of classical Indian ideas and arguments. Second, they demand mastery of Western philosophy, especially modern Western philosophy. And third, you have to be politically familiar with regard to the colonial context. And you cannot shy away from that. So the first one involves, in my reading, responsibility towards the classical Indian philosophical text. And the second one demands an emotive involvement in dealing with your adversary. And the third one calls for cognitive competence that has to be created. So this is the complex kind of prerequisites or qualifications that you need if you are doing modern Indian philosophy. All these three, namely, inheriting the past with responsibility in dealing with the classical Indian text, responding to the colonial context. Before that, mastery of the Western philosophy, responding to the colonial context, and also claiming something on behalf of the classical India are amply available in the writings of this great philosopher of 20th century from India, namely Krishna Chandra Bhattacharya. And now he embarks on inheriting with responsibility the classical Indian philosophy, especially Vedanta, Sankhya, Yoga, Jainism, and Buddhism, thus creating a strong and broad philosophical platform to launch what I call as modern Indian philosophy. He has also responded brilliantly to colonialism, rejected slavery of the spirit, and made a case for Swaraj ideas in this very famous talk that he gave as a principal of Hooghly College, Hooghly, to the students, and subsequently this talk was published as an essay. Now, there is something which is very interesting about this. It's a path-breaking essay, and it is further interesting that it is a second document, or the other document, along with Swaraj, Hind Swaraj of Mahatma Gandhi. Both of them, interestingly, derive inspiration from Jainism. K.C. Bhattacharya, philosophy as an alternative, he has reverberates Anekantavada of Jainism, and then the non-violence of Jainism has been a major influence on Mahatma Gandhi. So these two important documents of anti-colonial struggle of this subcontinent in 20th century are interestingly influenced by Jainism. So, and third one, namely displaying cognitive competence in a creative way. You find that Krishna Chandra Bhattacharya displays this in his path-breaking work, the subject as freedom. Now you find in the subject as freedom several references to philosophers like Kant, Hegel, Spencer, and so on, J.S. Mill's logic included. And then he just shows how Indian philosophers, particularly of a Vedanta type or a Sankhya type, are much superior on some very significant aspects of philosophy in comparison to people like Kant and Hegel. He shows how Vedanta is superior, and he does a very clinical kind of an argumentation and discussions, which again, if you really wanted to access that body of knowledge, it is necessary for one to not only know Vedanta or other schools of Indian philosophy, but also should have a competence in Western philosophy. Not only these two, the competence in Indian philosophy and also competence in Western philosophy, but they should know how to calibrate, how to compare. So you need these three kinds of competences in trying to understand this complex argumentation that is available in his book, The Subject as Freedom. But the essence of K.C. Bhattacharya's Metaphysics and Epistemology is available in this essay called The Concept of Philosophy, which he wrote primarily to the volume edited by Radhakrishna and Muirhead for the Muirhead Library series. That's one of the fascinating articles, summarizes brilliantly his philosophy. And according to Kalidas Bhattacharya, concept of philosophy displays more clear and a mature Krishnachandra Bhattacharya in comparison to Subject as Freedom. Now, what he does here is, let me just, instead of just making the claims, let me illustrate what it does in this very interesting article, The Concept of Philosophy. What he does is the following. He says that Kant is a modern philosopher, and most of modernity in the West is dependent on the self, modern self as it is called, which is founded by Descartes and polished by Kant in his critics. But then Krishnachandra Bhattacharya identifies a serious philosophical flaw in Kant. And this flaw in Kant has implications to the flaw in modernity too. So that's why it's a very important essay. The flaw is the following. He says that Kant, in his epistemology, makes self as the only source of knowing. Self is the only source of knowledge. Okay. The knowledge is possible only through self. However, points out Krishnachandra Bhattacharya, in Kant, self cannot be known. So self is the one which knows everything. There is nothing outside the self within the purview of knowledge. However, if somebody asks, okay, self knows everything, but then how do we know the self? There is no answer in Kant. And Bhattacharya says that Kant realized this limitation and he evaded it by saying it is a necessity of thought or moral requirement, which are very naive and weak supports for a whole edifice of modernity that rests on self. So he says that this is the biggest problem in Kant. And there is no way Kant can get out of this impasse. Okay, so then he starts analyzing Kantian predicament, and he says, in Kant, or Kant equated knowing with thinking. Knowing with thinking. And it is a self that knows, but through thinking, but self cannot be known. If you allow self to be known, then he says it leads to infinite regress. So that's the reason why we must terminate it at that time. And the reason, and if you terminate it at that point, then there is a serious problem. And the serious problem is that then the self is no different from theological God. Because even in theology, God is the creator of everything. But who creates God? We don't ask that question. So there is a disguised theology in Kant because he equated knowing with thinking. First, it relapses, either there is a disguised theology or it relapses into agnosticism. K.C. Bhattacharya tries to overcome this problem, provides a wonderful solution when he says that in Vedanta or in other schools of Indian philosophy, there is a solution to Kant. And what is the solution? In Vedanta, according to K.C. Bhattacharya, there is a possibility of knowing without thinking, which is what is called as the self-knowledge of the Vedanta tradition. Now, if you sit and write up for this as an algorithm, you will find that here is a person who has displayed his competence in identifying a crucial defect in Western philosophy. And that defect is not a small defect. It's a defect that concerns not only Kant, but entire modernity, but also brought in Indian philosophy as providing a solution. And now you know what I meant when I said that this is not a simple feat, philosophical feat. It is a gigantic move. And this gigantic move, even at the cost of repeating, requires competence of two different types. One, competence to master classical Indian philosophy, competence to master Western philosophy, and the competence to calibrate Western philosophy with Indian philosophy. These three are two distinct competences, and K.C. Bhattacharya displays them like nobody else. Incidentally, no Kantian scholar identifies this kind of a defect in Kant. That's a point that I wanted to make. Just give me a minute. So, after this illustration, let me now come back to the point that I was making. Namely, there is a variance between doing Western philosophy, classical Indian philosophy on the one hand, and where there is a clearly identified purva-paksha, and in contrast, doing modern West Indian philosophy, which demands multiple competences, that is the knowledge of the classical India, modern Western, critique of colonialism, and the idea of Swaraj and creative cognitive competence. So the prerequisites are more than in the case of either doing Western philosophy or doing classical Indian philosophy. So if you really wanted to do modern Western philosophy, modern Indian philosophy, you have to be doubly equipped, triply equipped in that thing. There is yet another, so there is a variance between doing these two kinds of philosophies and doing modern West Indian philosophy. Now there is yet another variance between what Bhattacharya wrote and how he is introduced by the editor of his writings, titled Studies in Philosophy, and his editor is Gopinath Bhattacharya. So this is what I wanted to present to you. Now, the editor of this volume, called titled Studies in Philosophy, is divided into two volumes. Okay, they were initially, when they were published by Progressive Publishers of Kolkata, they were published as two different volumes. But when Progressive Publishers, I think, published them second time and subsequently by Motilal and Ashtangas, they have been presented and as a single volume. So there are two volumes in a single book. In the first volume, you have one of the best repositories of presenting classical Indian philosophy in a modern idiom, not just in a summary form, but in a comparative access. He downloads these things, keeping them alongside of Western philosophers like Kant, Hegel, Spencer, Mill, and what have you. So now it is not just, as I said, it is not just summarizing Vedanta. It is not just translating Shankara. It is understanding those things and then restating them in a modern idiom so that it makes sense to all the people who do not accept Vedanta, because of the dominant presence of Western philosophy. So that is the first volume. In the second volume, you have his creative writings that consists of the studies in philosophy, subject as freedom, and concept of philosophy, studies in Kant, and things like that. But though there are these two important, phases of his writings that are represented or included in volume 1 and volume 2, what is intriguing, surprising, in fact, it is stunningly surprising, is that this essay called Swarajin Ideas, which I made a brief mention earlier, is missing from this collection. It's a prominent essay. It's an essay that is that subsequently has become a subject of a special issue in 1984 of Indian Philosophical Quarterly, which has editors that included Ramchandra Gandhi, K.J. Shah, then Prabal Das Gupta and others, and had articles by luminaries of both philosophy and social sciences. But intriguingly, this article is not included in this edited volume of studies in philosophy. That's something that surprised me. Not only that it is not included in the studies in studies in philosophy, it also was not referred to even once in two important earlier works on the philosophy of K.C. Bhattacharya. One is the K.C. Bhattacharya Memorial volume, edited by G.R. Malkani and Atal, luminaries again, published from Indian Philosophical Institute, Center for Philosophy, Amalner. No, there is no reference to it. And then there is no reference to it in 1992 or 93. I think it's 1992 special issue on the philosophy of K.C. Bhattacharya in JACPIR. So while Bhattacharya undertakes the inheriting the classical Indian philosophy, thus creating a larger philosophical platform, the editor seeks to project him as a distinctive. So that's the missing of Swarajin Ideas is something which is, which is very, very, which shows the variance between how the editor is projecting the writings of K.C. Bhattacharya. The other important difference between the way in which the editor projected and the way in which K.C. Bhattacharya is there are two introductions in this volume. There is an introduction by K.C. Bhattacharya to his book called Studies in Vedanta, which is an interesting book, which is published separately by Calcutta University. And there is an introduction by K.C. Bhattacharya, by the editor, that is Gopinath Bhattacharya, to this volume. Now, in his own introduction, K.C. Bhattacharya seeks to provide a larger platform for Indian philosophy, larger bandwidth to use a modern metaphor, so that both classical Indian philosophy is, and can be rejuvenated in a modern idiom. However, the editor tries to project K.C. Bhattacharya as an individual creative philosopher. There is a difference between, making a collective bandwidth and projecting somebody as projecting the personal image of somebody. So the distinctiveness of K.C. Bhattacharya in his own introduction is to take on really head-on Tibet, who made light of Shankara's commentary on Vedanta Sutras and also Upanishads. And then he says that there's a difference between doing philosophy and doing history of philosophy. And he alleges that Tibet was only doing history of philosophy. That should come after doing philosophy, which he has not done. So he takes on him on this inverted sequence, which is a very, very big allegation. So there is a need to factor these variants between doing Western philosophy and classical Indian philosophy, and also the variance between Krishna Chandra Bhattacharya and how he is projected by the editor of his writings. So I wanted to just, end by saying that what we have in front of us in the modern times are fantastic writers, but it's a pathetic thing that we have not read them carefully. And many people who researched on K.C. Bhattacharya have not read the editor's introduction, which projects K.C. Bhattacharya in one direction, which is quite variant, sometimes opposed to the direction that K.C. Bhattacharya himself projects in his own introduction to one part of that volume, namely Studies in Vedanta. Now, not anyone who worked on it, written on it, published on K.C. Bhattacharya have pointed out these things, which only shows not that I am great and all. It only shows that there is a large repository of works in contemporary Indian philosophy that awaits close scrutiny, through which you can really get global recognition. Global recognition. That is the kind of a material that is in front of us. So thank you once again for giving this rare opportunity. I thank Professor Singh and for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Raghuram Raju. You have brought out, the very spirit of KCB's thinking. And I remember Professor A.C. Mukherjee used to remember him very profoundly. And his book also, The Nature of Self, is greatly a way of, redoing Kantian unity of apperception or the unknowability of it, the paralogisms at the level of Anubhuti in Vedanta philosophy. But then it requires a prolonged debate and discussion. We will have some questions at the end of it. So thank you very much for bringing this issue. And now I would like to invite a scientist, very distinguished scientist, Professor Balram Singh. He has been professor since 1990 at the age of 33. He became professor, and then another professorship, Henry Dreyfus, teacher scholar since 1977 at UMass Dartmouth until 2014, when he took up a voluntary retirement and opened up an Institute of Advanced Sciences, Dartmouth, Massachusetts States. So he is the adjunct faculty in the School of Sanskrit and Indian Studies at JNU, and he He has been professor at many universities. The list is very long one. And basically, he's a practicing scientist and also interested in the studies on Indian culture and civilization, family life, and everything else. He's the editor of and editor and also the associate editor of 4 journals, including biochemical and biophysical research and reports and everything else. So best thing is that he is one of the alumni of Jawaharlal Nehru University. He did his MSc and MPhil from School of Life Sciences before he went to US. And then, the CV is very long with 14 books, 325 articles, and number of lectures, maybe around 800 or 900 seminars, and all that stuff. So, but let us listen to him. The theme he's trying to develop today in the seminar, that philosophical, scientific method and philosophical inquiry, interfacing that these two together. Professor Balram Singh. You have to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Professor R.P. Singh. It's always
Yeah.
an honor and privilege to listen to you and philosophers. I have learned tremendously in my career as a scientist, and my science has become better as a consequence. So I'm going to share some of my thoughts, and hopefully that will make sense, will not be too complicated. I guess nothing can be too complicated to a philosopher, and that may be a test of their field and their academic work. So I'm going to start with, let's see, I'm sharing my slides, so hopefully that is working. And it seems to be working, maybe not. It's not right now. I'm having problem with it. I'm having some problems, so I'm going to share again. Hopefully that will work. Yeah, there we go. So we have Doctor of Philosophy and then we have Doctor of Science. This is very interesting thing that historically all these things started somewhere in 12th century and then picked up really in more in 17th century. An interesting thing is science is knowledge and philosophy is love of knowledge. So I think they are interconnected, at least from that point of view. And one could debate as to which one is better, which one is more useful. But I think they are so much connected. So it makes perfect sense to have the theme that you have today. And the theme that is a philosophy, science, and value. So hopefully there will be some value in our discussions. I want to take you to ancient and modern theology and darshan. I think there is I would like to make this distinction that there is a difference, and I think um, uh, there was some discussion just before. It is difficult to have Indian philosophy uh, described in terms of the Western, the words and then terms, and which is really true. And because there are a lot of other things involved, some of it becomes religious, and their thoughts are very different. So here is an example of what is the Western world, how the Western world sees. They think that the people are born by inbuilt guilt or some kind of sin, whereas even the Western people, a scientist who got Nobel Prize for physics, Schrodinger said actually Atman is same as Brahmin. So there is no, you are all great rather than being sinful, and that makes a difference. And then you have some scientific research being done these days to find out which of these might be true. And actually, both of them may be true in certain circumstances, but I want to present here without really going into details of technicality and data to suggest that people were surveyed in the United States, and this was published in one of the highest journals proceedings of National Academy of Science in the United States. where they found that what on some moral issues like abortion or homosexuality or things of that nature, moral issues, about 10 moral issues, that what they think of themselves and they think about typical American. They found actually there is difference between self and a typical American on moral issues. And then there was what is the difference between what God thinks about these things and what a typical American thinks. There is more difference. But what they found when they asked people, what do you think and what God thinks, they found no difference. So that basically proves at least the Schrodinger's ideas, Atman is same as Brahmin, at least in thought of people. Now this, remember this, the people were not asked to answer in words. They were actually recorded in their brain as to what they are thinking. So the whole concept of Aham Brahmasmi, in some sense, scientifically is proven. So I think this connection makes better sense of science and philosophy, because I think you can pursue things that is maybe philosophical question, but it is not beyond science. And this is one of the things that Professor R.P. Singh had taken me, I think maybe 2001, 2002, a discussion at India International Center was going on whether India has a philosophy. And that was, I think, prompted by External Affairs Ministry, because I think they were having difficulty in doing their diplomacy in the world, where people were saying that India does not have philosophy. And so this is a very practical problem I think people have to think about, and I think it's a challenge for Indian academic world to really come to grips of this. And then the way to do is not just define Indian philosophy in terms of West, but actually define Indian philosophy in terms of Indian philosophy, and also then look at the rest of the world and hopefully define them according to Indian philosophy as well, because I think that's more scientific. At least it's scientifically approachable. So there are questions like this in the best also, that wow, somebody is more intelligent or less intelligent, so, and whether that has anything to do with science or the brain in this example. Yes, they found actually difference, and Einstein's difference, brain was different. It had taken over, the inferior parietal lobe has taken over on the parietal operculum, and seems like so he was more capable of doing that. So this is a peculiar thing for a scientist to philosopher to think, that there is a basis of even what and how we think. And so that means science can approach some of the unknown questions, and that doesn't mean there will not be more unknown questions. There will be, but at least they can be put in the steps. And that reminds me of another conference that many times Professor R.P. Singh has been very kind to take me, and there was a Michael Kreutz, I think, philosophy of Michael Kreutz, who was from Philadelphia, and he had given a talk about an hour, and his conclusion was that science is very different. But I am here to try to suggest that I think they can go together, if not the same, at least they can go together to help each other. So even our thinking is, sometimes we think we are thinking, actually we are not necessarily thinking by ourselves, because there are other interactions. And that, for example, this is very well established, that our brain, our thinking is affected either directly by other bugs which are around, or indirectly. So for example, even coronavirus is very well known. Actually, there is some lot of study going on that it has changed the thinking of people, because it can infect even the brain, and there are certain receptors which are present heavily in brain, and it binds to those receptors. Actually, even the vaccine actually might be doing that. Vaccine, the one they have, still binds to that receptor, and so, it may be affecting. So that's very important to look at these aspects of science, and then move on with other questions, but at least not be stuck on some simpler questions, because we are able to go after them. So the definition of philosophy and who is philosopher is that the person who has thirst of knowledge, or somebody who has curious to learn and never be satisfied. which means it never ending. So, and that is the same thing, believe it or not, even though science does show some aspects for a particular time, it looks like we have reached a conclusion, but it is only, the conclusion is only temporary. It's always almost like a stairs, you know, you go to one step and then go to next step and then you go to next step. So the science does in the steps, I guess philosopher might be doing in more like a ramp. Nevertheless, there is this concept of utopia that philosophers love to have and discuss about it, and it is something that doesn't exist in general term. And this was one of the conversation I had with Professor R.P. Singh that, to certain degree at least, brought the topic that we are discussing today. And so there is a concept of utopia, and then there is a which is always going to be true, because you are always going to have something that you don't have, at least at that point. So then you have all these utopian ideas of anarchist, ecological, feminist, patriarchal, egalitarian, you know, you can name it, almost anything, Marxist, socialist, gay, lesbian, everybody has some kind of utopian idea that this is how it should be. Well, it never gets there, but then it doesn't hurt to have this idea. And this is similar, you know, we're talking about, when we talk about India, they have the concept of adarsh. And I just said that philosophy and darshan are slightly different. I think darshan, which is what is the Sanskrit word for philosophy in India, is closer to science, because in science also you can see, you can realize the knowledge at least to a certain degree. And then, but this idea of utopia can be considered as adarsh. And you know, interestingly, adarsh is the same as darshan. You know, the word adarsh comes or close to the same as darshan. And here, of course, the meaning is like a mirror, which means that basically you see. Sometimes you see yourself in a mirror, your own ideas. Also, day of a new moon, again, that's the same thing as related to see. It Sanskrit people, some of them are here, and they can really play a greater role in trying to explain all this. And I do not have really that much time, because I want to say a few other things, to go into the etymology of that. Has two negatives, you know, not negative c means, that means really see. And that has so scientific approach to it, that you always try to find out what is not true. The neti in Indian philosophy, you always say this is not, this is not, this is not. If you can say all nots, then what it is left is what it is. And the same thing is done in science. I also try to use this uttamas, like, because we have purushottam, maryada purushottam, considered as adarsh. So it comes to be the same, you know, it never ending, it keeps going up and up and uppermost, and following that. So I think there is a something to learn from Western philosophy. The ideas are very similar. The words may be used differently. And Indian philosophy, and how this is all connected to science. I think it's easier to have the Indian philosophy, Indian practice of philosophy closer to in terms of approach to science than Western. And because there's certain belief system that comes, that which I said earlier about, you know, that people are born with sin or something, that makes things more complicated, and science becomes a victim, because there are several types of science, including human cloning, or understanding how the humans are evolved. Evolution theory are many times banned, actually, and many times there are a lot of political issues about that in the Western world. Not in Indian sense. India actually has in its constitution that everybody should have a scientific temper. So now I want to talk a little bit more about this ideal situation, or adarsh, or utopian idea. Now I have these things listed for those who not familiar with these Boyle's law, Charles' law. It's really not that much of a big deal. It's just, you know, when you pressure something, you can press something that squeezes, its volume goes down. And when you heat something, volume goes up. So the first one is Boyle's law, second one is Charles' law. And but interesting thing is that these two laws, when they are put together, they come up with an equation called ideal gas equation. whereby you have pressure P and volume V equal to, when you multiply this, it becomes the number of whatever that is, in this case gas, and temperature. So these if you have a high number of gas and you increase the temperature, then you will see that there will be increase in pressure or in the volume. Now that is not the function that I really wanted to play here. I want to just say that this ideal gas equation is very important. And why this ideal gas? Why not just any gas, real gas, just be the real? Is because, and then the assumptions about those ideals, which is like very philosophical. In philosophy, people make certain assumptions and then argue about it. So it has negligible volume, it has random motions, it has elastic interaction. Elastic interaction means it does not lose energy. So it is these assumptions are very important for this ideal gas, because you do not want to this any gas molecule to attach to any idea, because it's supposed to be totally random, nothing to do with each other or with wherever they are. It's just we have to assume them to be completely individual and totally random and not affecting each other at all, which is really not real, as we know. But that's only way we make scientific laws. I suggest that utopian is the only way you can understand and come up with the philosophical ideas. The only thing in there would be, for example, when we have an adarsh, an ideal, in case of Indian philosophy, you can pursue it, so that pursue, that the pursharth, the word also comes from pursue. So then you can pursue it, and that's good enough. And in some cases, like, when they're talking about there is a sin and then you can't do anything about it, that is, I think, anti-science. But otherwise, in scientific thing is really, do you pursue it? So there is a, this is just to prove, as a scientist, I always have to have some proof. So second law of thermodynamics is what I just talked about. Is connected to, here you can see PV is equal to nRT. This is another scientific physics concept, is quantum mechanics. Both of them need this R, this R value here. If you take this R value, which means you take this ideal condition, science is gone completely. There is no science left. So even though a scientist always realize certain things, but they always believe in something that is very ideal and cannot be reached, which is like utopian. So I think in that sense, we have this commonality. And with that, there is something else that shows up. Again, my apologies for bringing some equations here, but say they are very simple enough for you to understand. When something, you have reactants and something becomes a product, the chemist and physicist find a way to express them, and they just take a ratio of those. It's called a reaction quotient. If there is something happens, so you have reaction quotient, how much product you got out of how many reactants, and there may be sometimes they are equal, and sometimes you have more reactant, you have less product, sometimes you have more product, less reaction. And these are the conditions, again, that uses that R value. You need to have that ideal condition, universal gas constant, as they call, which has to be created only in ideal condition. If you take that ideal condition, everything falls apart. But this works. The thing is that the equilibrium is very important, and this concept of equilibrium, where you think of something and something happens, so that becomes like your product. Happens is product, thinking is what you did. And so you can use this concept of equilibrium or this reaction quotient with thoughts also. Not only this, what I just showed you here, it is all material stuff. We can measure the gas, we can measure some chemicals, but this also can be done with thoughts. So you have some certain amount of thought, and it can create certain amount of action. Then you can write this equation where you have how much action happened with how many thoughts. And then you can, now you can examine it scientifically or physically or mathematically as to how effective your thoughts have been. I suggest that philosophers try that, and see whether they can come up with some scientific, what will be scientific expression of their philosophy. This also can be done when you have next step. You have thoughts, you have action, and then you have solution. If you do some action, you might come up with some solution, and that also can be then written another equation, KSQ, which is just like what I showed earlier, is just a ratio. You have how many solutions you created with how many actions. Maybe sometimes one action creates many solutions, and sometimes many actions create one solution. So you have then equilibrium again, and we can work together. Some of you who may be interested in this, this is a third, this is the whole concept I developed because Professor R.P. Singh wanted to have the discussion about scientific methodology and philosophical inquiries. So I thought, well, maybe we can come up with some kind of a new science where we have the science of philosophy or philosophical thoughts or philosophical action. And so very interesting, this is very simple mathematics here. And so in one case you have thought and action, in another case you have action and solution. And then you can bring those thoughts are generally associated with philosophy, like I said, and like hypothesis, assumptions, and things like that. And actions are karma and observations, as in experimental science. So we already married the two, and then we can come up with an outcome. We can have some kind of solution, and the solution ends a philosophical exercise, because the moment you got it. But the philosophical process is essential for the karma and the observations to achieve the solution. In this way, darshana is more like science, which utilizes philosophy to initiate the journey of a solution. And then once you get the solution, as you know, human beings always go further. And so you can come up with this multiplication of the one equation to the other equation, and then you ultimately get how many solutions you come up with, how many thoughts. You come up with one simple thought, and you can have so many solutions. And that will be a computational wonder if we were able to do that. And I think that's something eventually leads from darshana to samadhan, and samadhan is of course a philosophical concept. So I think we should be able to do that kind of exercise, and together, and particularly bring this kind of idea to the Western world. And the Western world would not even imagine something like that, but this is very very practical and very Indian. And so there are some other issues that are very important for us to know, which I said earlier, that you have to, ideal condition, everybody has to be individual. But here is the thing, everything is individual. There is nothing that is duplicate. There is nothing that can be replicated. So we Indian concept have been accepting. So is science. We all accept that everything has to be individual for making the laws. So here is an example for an individual. You can take a forensic your DNA, you can take thumb print, you can take your face, you can record your voice, everything. Even your way of walking is never before, never after. It's all very individual. And sometimes these ideal conditions, why we have to have this ideal condition, now this will explain. Because everything is so individual, you cannot connect one from the other. Of course, there is a process, social process by which you do, but at least you realize that you are different. And I did some experiment with my students in a class, where I asked students to record themselves at a given time and in certain ways, and not just perceiving themselves, and came up with some scale. And we found actually that there are 9.3 times 10 to the power 20 possible ways that a student can perceive herself or himself. And that what it led to, that everybody is unique and free to be a leader. It means that because you are yourself, one can live in the moment. Because I did the test that if I ask you to repeat the same experiment, you are not the same again, because it mathematically looks you are different. Rest is changed substantially. Like to introduce quantum alteration, if it is practice with Indian scientists and philosophers together, it will make a quantum alteration in scientific understanding and scientific practice, and the value of philosophy. So I suggest that when we practice something like that, whether there are differences, but then appreciation versus, of course, now what we practice, the region democracy works in that sense, because you make laws and apply to everybody, but it divides everything. So there is a connection to be made when you have a scientific philosophical thinking versus when you convert into social or economic or political. So here in democracy, everybody tries to divide Hindu, Muslim, Christian, this caste, that caste. And then you have many concepts that you have to come up with. You have to educate people. You have to bring so much resources. You have to bring dialogue, Professor R.P. Singh mentioned. And then you have to develop a lot of communities. You need a lot of things. And then, but when you just keep going up where there is a, I mean, I'm calling it Prajatantra, which is a little bit different. Don't have time to talk about it today, but basically Mahatma Gandhi talked about that, and which says that we must be the change that we wish to see. As simple as that. So if your conduct is the one really, if you get to that, that's called Prajatantra in my definition. And even Einstein said the example isn't another way to teach. It is the only way to teach. The moment you put yourself as an example, you don't need to teach anybody anything, because they just accept it. So this, the division of all kinds, and then eventually a conduct, is the one which really can teach people. Interestingly, the doctor of philosophy, the word doctor really literally means to teach. Of course, you have to have certain qualifications to teach. That's why you need to have that degree. But actually, ultimate role is to teach. So now I want to briefly, I have a few more minutes to talk about how the science is done. You know, there is a science is done, there is a definition. You have to make everything very systematic. Then you have to have the non-scientific truth you have to find, which is Newton's definition said non-falsifiable. Like I was saying earlier, neti, neti, you have to simple say, this is not, this is not, this is not. Then only whatever is left is scientific truth. And then the question is, we do this by objectivity. You objectify everything in science, but actually it's only for Western world, because the Western world does not believe that you can be neutral, you can be nispaksh, or you can be detached. So they don't believe that you can do. But Indian concept actually, the yoga and other kind of things, that you can be. And this is just a human. It's nothing to do with East, West, not this religion, that religion. It's just a human. Anybody can practice and experience it. Subjectivity is very important because that is, again, you makes you to be different. Because you cannot be somebody else. You cannot just follow somebody else, no matter what. Even you talk about God, that's not the case, because God and you are not different. So this is very important, that when we are trying to use philosophy, then we need to understand the assumptions, we need to understand the theory behind it, and then you have to see in your conditions. So this philosopher actually, from Yale University, who wrote a foreword for Werner Heisenberg's book, he says that when comprehended, these philosophical assumptions generate a personal and social mentality and behavior quite different from, at points incompatible with, the family, caste, and tribally centered mentality of native Asian, Middle Eastern, and African people. Is basically trying to say that you have to develop for yourself. You cannot copy from somewhere else, which is part of the problem that we have had. There are ontological aspects, there are epistemological aspects, both in science and philosophy. I mean, everybody knows about this. I would not talk much about that. I just want to briefly, I have 4 minutes, I think, briefly touch upon a way of approaching knowledge, both in philosophy and in science, deductive way and inductive way. In deductive way, we have observation, and then we come up with the theory, and inductive way, we have theory, and then we come up with the confirmation. I've written here, for example, quantum mechanics is a theory, and then we come up with the trying to confirm, and it's really not confirming very well. But here is philosophy seminar we are talking about, and we call it agam and nigam, you know, in Indian terms. And whereas yoga, Saiva, local traditions, Ayurveda is agam, because you make observations and you come up with the theory. Whereas the nigam is Veda, Bible, Quran, they all have already their ideas fixed, and then they give other people to make observation and confirm that that works for them. And but then in Indian system, you can go back and forth. And as in also in science, we also make theories, and sometimes we try to confirm, and sometimes we make observation, then come up with a theory. So this is not like one versus the other. India is a very old tradition. They have figured it out that they can go back and forth. Although sometimes some people tell me that Vedas have said something, nothing can be done about it, and nothing can be farther from truth about that. In my opinion, I think that's so non-Vedic to say something like that. But on the other hand, there are some other practical things. For example, the 7 days, you know, today is Wednesday, and who said today is Wednesday? There is no no natural phenomenon that says today is Wednesday. But if you were to talk about tithis based on moon, which is also, by the way, accepted in every culture, even every religion, one way or the other, the moon position is very important because that is so natural. So if you're really talking about deductive, you're talking about you observing the nature. If you're talking about inductive, somebody has told you that there are 7 days and the world was created in 7 days, so just better keep those 7 days. They have no reality next to it. Finally, I want to say a couple of words with chemistry, and want to use this chemistry concept. I mean, I'm showing this table, don't get intimidated by that. The last portion is important. These are ideal gases, by the way. These are ideal gases, but for number one, gases are always ideal, relatively speaking, because they're free. So even though big gas molecule, which also is free, is floating, though that freedom is very important for ideal. And so everything in this world is trying to become ideal, try to reach that ideality. And that's why I'm showing this table. They have a kind of configuration in chemistry. And I'm just going to, and that chemistry is, there is a noble or ideal gas configuration, the noble electronic configuration, which basically says at the end of this, without going into detail, because the audience is really not that scientifically prepared here, the last one is eight electrons in the last orbit, as they call it, and that is considered ideal, except for helium. Helium only needs 2 because it's very small. So in this world, everything is ideal when it is inert, not reactive, just like in yoga, for example. But there is electronic configuration in terms of atoms, which also non-reactive when they reach that octet state. And this is the last point I want to make. When they are in that ideal state, they are non-dual. They are not reactive. They do not want to react with anything. But everything else, all other elements, for example, sodium has 1 extra electron, and chlorine has 1 less. It has 7 here. It has only 1. So that's why they want to reach the state of ideal, for example, argon. And so they share, they give 1 of the electron to chlorine. Chlorine has 8 and sodium also has 8. This is pseudo, but that creates the duality. And this is the basis of the world that is created, at least chemically speaking. So with this concept, we can see that we have married and integrated what might be considered as a philosophy and what might be considered as science, both of them in their own way having their methodology, which are very similar. Maybe some mathematics in science can give you some real numbers, some concrete ideas that makes it science, but philosophy is not far behind. And I hope that we will be able to move into that direction and do further concepts with that idea. Okay, I will end. My time has ended. And so I think I made my point that I wanted to make, and having a slide left is not going to be more different.
Thank you very much, Professor Balram Singh. You have brought the theme and the presentation and the discussion at a very high level, in terms of both philosophy and science, the methodological interface between the two. And there are some questions also coming up in the chat bot that we will share later on. And we have some scientists also who will specifically comment on your presentation. So that we'll see during the question answer session. So once again, thank you very much. And now we have Professor Alex Hankey, Professor Emeritus, who was educated as a theoretical physicist at Cambridge University, and he gained his PhD in physics from MIT under Professor Stephen Weinberg. He is a Nobel laureate, and H.E. Stanley. Then later on, he shifted his interest towards transcendental meditation in 1969 and became a checker of meditation, guiding meditations in yoga, limb of Pratyahara since 1971. In 1973, he became the teacher of transcendental meditation, joining the nascent Maharshi International University, and later learning the more advanced TM Siddhi program, kind of a thing. So he worked for Maharshi's organization for the last 30 years, lecturing on Vedic sciences and organizing many seminars and conferences. Currently, he is a professor of biology uh, at Dr. Vishwanath Kalath Maharashtra Institute of Technology, World Peace Foundation. He has authored many books and many citations are there in different indexed articles and ranking him uh, among the world's top 2% of scientists. So list drawn up by the Stanford University. His book, The Science of Medical Astronomy, the experimental proof of Jyotisha, was published in 2009, and he is on the editorial board of many journals. And uh, now I invite Professor Alex Hankey to speak on yoga. And Professor Alex Hankey, he had joined. Alex, you are here?
Yes, I am
Yeah.
here,
Yes,
and I
please.
wish to share my screen. Can
Yeah.
you allow me to share my screen? But it says that,
You want some help?
well, screen sharing has been disabled. So if you
So
could allow me to share a screen,
if
I will be
Anuja,
able
can you
to
help
share
him?
my PowerPoint.
Anuja, unmute yourself and help him.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you can share, Alex. You can share. I already did it.
Oh, good. Thank you. This is what I want to share. Good. So
Yes, very good.
here we are. This is my usual format. And I start with one of my friends' pictures who works on a concept he calls absolute art. Dr. Lawrence Sheaf was the chief artistic designer for Maharishi Mahesh Yogi for many years. So the title of my talk is Yoga and Human Emancipation. And I'm working currently with one of my PhD students on a new translation of Yoga Sutras, which contains new angles and interpretations. And Patanjali Yoga Sutras, human emancipation in Patanjali Yoga Sutras. And here is a lovely traditional statue of Maharshi Patanjali with the famous Kundalini snake surrounding his lower half. So let's move down. The meaning of emancipation, I thought that I should focus on this. It means freedom from being controlled, and it usually refers to being controlled by others. In this case, it means being controlled by one's own karma, because what Bhagavad Gita advises us is, in the most general sense, yogastha kuru karmani, established in yoga, perform action. Bhagavad Gita 248, if I remember correctly. And this whole structure is completely explained, as it turns out, in Patanjali Yoga Sutras. So this gives us a very accurately defined philosophy of human emancipation as the final goal of yoga. And it tells us very beautifully how the whole structure of human freedom is embedded in the ancient Indian philosophy. And you cannot have it without such concepts as the self. And I particularly enjoyed our first talk where Immanuel Kant was referred to in detail. And I often talk about Immanuel Kant's fundamental insights when I approach this whole topic, writing papers on the idea of human freedom. So yoga should be regarded as the standard system of human HRD, human research development for the Vedic civilization of around 4000 BC. Its aim was to create the next generation of rishis and maharshis, hence its purpose to develop perfected minds. A rishi, a maharshi, was an individual who had incarnated and come back specifically to attain superpowers, if you like to call them as such, which could be used to serve society. But the only way that it was safe to give a person the superpowers was to actually establish them in a state of freedom. So here I'm defining here emancipation is liberation from the binding influence of one's own karma. And you will remember how Arjuna says on the battlefield to Lord Krishna, but what you're telling me to do is the most appalling sin. What is going to happen to me if I commit these appalling sins? And Krishna says, as long as you are obeying my instructions, you are doing divine will because I am on that divine plane. So you will not incur karma of any negative kind by killing Karna and Bhishma and others on the battlefield if I give you the instruction. So in this way, under divine guidance, emancipation for Arjuna was liberation from the binding effects of actions he was going to perform on Kurukshetra, which stands metaphorically for the entire battlefield of life, with the conflict between the positive and the negative forces, more commonly called by those slightly emotionally tinged words good and evil. One can define the positive things as that which brings you to a state of freedom, and the negative as those that bind you back to a state of boundedness and having negative influences on your future karmas. So the Yoga Sutras was a standard text. It's an integral aspect of Sanatana Dharma. It was meant to produce the next generation of rishis and maharshis. It has an eightfold system, and we had an earlier discussion which was very revealing about the thought of Lord Buddha and essentially the philosophy Mahavir, but you particularly find that Buddha also produced an eightfold system of thought. We need to have a right means of generation of income, right means of working, right means of meditation, and another 5 more correct systems in order to make progress on the path. And I like to think that Buddha living, we know Buddha's dates much more accurately than Maharishi Patanjali. Buddha living maybe 2,500 years after Lord Krishna, and 3,500 years potentially after Maharishi Patanjali, was going to use a similarly conceived eightfold system. So what is the Yoga Sutras? It's a practice-oriented text, pada by pada, chapter by chapter, if you like. It explains practical methods of 1, raising levels of awareness, 2, gaining deeper wisdom, 3, developing the higher potentials of mind, and 4, going beyond the lower mind, so that one attains this marvelous sounding word, which is so mistranslated, kaivalya. I should tell you later the story that we received about kaivalya from His Holiness Maharshi Mahesh Yogi, who took it from Lakshman Ju, the head of Kashmiri Shaivism in the 1960s. So each pada actually describes the complete path to revelation. One in terms of awareness, the other in terms of overcoming problems on the path, the third in terms of accelerating the whole process using higher potentials of the mind, and pada 4 summarizing the whole way to arrive at moksha, which is actually called kaivalya in Yoga Sutras. So if you look at the Yoga Sutras in outline, pada 1 deals explicitly with levels of absorption in certain gross or subtle levels of focus, that is to say, vikara samapati, nirvikara samapati, vichara samapati, nirvichara samapati, and then progressing from samapati, which is essentially an absorption of the mind in the object of perception, which is presented from a Vedanta perspective, interestingly, a transition to the states of samadhi, which can be translated as evenness of mind, complete peace, and so on. So we have the second one, second pada, is the enumeration of the Ashtangas, at least the first 5, needed to overcome obstacles like the kleshas, no longer the astarayas, but this time the kleshas, and then developing siddhis to accelerate the process, and then finally transcending the ordinary mind and arriving at states of mind where the awareness of the absolute is absolutely entrenched in the nature of awareness. So one can truly say, I am Atma Brahm. This, which is a Mahavakya which naturally precedes the identification of Aham Brahmasmi. This Atman that I have been experiencing and learnt to experience in meditation, dhan, dhyan, and then in samadhi, when all the thoughts go away in samadhi, the ordinary mind ceases to identify with the limitations, and each pada treats details of the path in its own inimitable way. So this is, I find, extremely beautiful. Levels of awareness, deeper wisdom, higher potentials, and the going beyond, transcending the lower mind, and describing complete paths to liberation. So pada 1, it starts with a summary of the whole path. It says, now yoga will be explained. Atha yoga anushasanam. And then it says the purpose of yoga, I've put in the purpose because that's effectively what it means. Yoga chitta vritti nirodha is to get rid of the fluctuations of mind. And when you look at this, it doesn't just mean your thoughts in the current state, though that is a very useful thing to achieve, to go to a state which is steeped in peace and without the disturbance of thought. What it's referring to is the entire structure of the chitta vrittis, which will come back and really disturb one in later minds. And then it describes in verse 4 the state of the mind prior to liberation, in which the mind identifies with the object of perception. It gives qualities needed to progress on the path, abhyas, persistence, and vairagya, non-attachment. Not being attached to the goal is specifically mentioned, actually later in Pada 2, from what I remember. So it's a description of progressively freer states of mind until the state of liberation is attained. And it describes the types of samadhi and samapati, which I've mentioned, the obstacles or antarayas, the attitudes that support progress, particularly 133 is a very useful sutra. I won't go into it. And it finally culminates in Nirvija Samadhi, Sutra 151, and it clarifies why at that point further seeds, vijas, and sanskaras will not be performed. So it starts with sampragnata samadhi and it moves on to from sabija samadhi, sampragnata samadhi, asampragnata samadhi, savitarka, nirvitarka, savichara, nirvichara, going up to ananda, ananda up to asmita, which is the second klesha, and then asmita up to nirvija samadhi. And samadhi without seed is repeated in this presentation, which my dear student found for me. I thought it was rather nice. And the ultimate samadhi named in chapter 4 is called Dharma Mega Samadhi, the samadhi of the raining cloud. And whenever you look at the wonderful pictures that are so popular of Mahalakshmi, and which are popular particularly during the festival of Mahalakshmi and various forms of Navaratri, the 9 days of Mother Divine, you will see that Mahalakshmi is being sprayed by elephants. And to my way of thinking, this is a beautiful illustration of the idea of the samadhi of the raining cloud, where essentially everything you want, every idea that could possibly be useful becomes available to you, and the very highest level of creativity becomes possible. And when that has been used to fulfill all your aspirations, then I can't show you this because white on white doesn't show. Kaivalya follows. So that's Pada 1. And Pada 2, Sadhana Pada, practices to achieve the higher samadhi, the kleshas and how to overcome them. The kleshas are very serious obstacles on the path. And this detailed attention to how to overcome the detailed obstacles like avidya and asmita are extraordinarily, they show an extraordinary quality of compassion in Maharshi Patanjali, because as he details, these present serious obstacles to progress. And the descriptions of overcoming avidya, the final klesha, are very beautifully expressed. And as I understand it, it's almost pure Advaita Vedanta. And this gives you later the Yoga Ashtangas, the 8 limbs of yoga, of which 5 up to Pratyahara are presented in this pada. So the list of Ashtangas, we have the yamas and niyamas, 5 of each. Surprisingly, it takes 16 verses to go through them, because you might think that 30 from 45 is 15, but actually it starts the verse, you have to count it when you count a 0 from the verse before. And you have the means to maintain freedom of mind and control of the body. We have 8 verses on asanas and pranayama, a single verse on Pratyahara, which is extremely revealing. And if I had time for it, I would very much like to go through it, because it's largely been mistranslated by the wrong association of the word iva with what comes afterwards, pratyahara, when it should actually be with the words that go before. And iva is taken to mean as if. And it's saying, when you get to that stage, it's as if you are identifying, if I remember rightly, as if you were identifying with the object of perception. But this is no longer the case when you stop using the five senses, the pancha gyanendriyas. And it's essentially coming up to the level of fitness to perform the antarangas. So those are the three which are dealt with in the next pada, the Vibhuti pada, the chapter dealing with the real richness of superlative states of consciousness which can support superpowers. And Sanyama is integral to this description. It describes Sanyama as an essential component of yoga practice in order to attain higher yoga. And it should always be seen as an integral part of yoga. And as far as I know, the only people teaching it today in India are Sadhguru Jagi Vasudev at Ishat Yoga in his city of Coimbatore, and the Maharshi Veda Vidyapith, which is located in the city of Bhopal in Madhya Pradesh, which was the state from which Maharshi Mahesh Yogi originated. So this is extremely important to realize that the original yogis didn't regard superpowers, supernormal powers, as a blockage to enlightenment, because they actually surrendered everything they attained to the divine, and they actually use their entire consciousness in service of the divine and mankind, bringing human beings to higher levels of attainment and avoiding, there's one lovely verse, Hayam Dukam Anagatam, avoid the danger which is yet to come. The future suffering, avoid it. This is a very beautiful way of explaining how these kinds of yoga, and actually Jyotish also, should be practiced. So Kaivalya Pada at the beginning describes the means of attaining siddhis. They come from birth or by intense concentration, wishing to develop one of them, or they come from using herbs, and there are famous examples of herbs which are hallucinogenic and don't do you very much good. But if you do them according to the prescriptions of chapter 3, you don't experience any harmful effects on body, mind, and spirit. So they enhance the cause and purpose of being an individual. They integrate the individual mind with cosmic mind. And then the Pada 4 describes how karma can be transcended, controlling thoughts and actions. It describes the unity of all things, i.e. essentially Advaita. This is yoga, but in the interpretation I'm giving it, it's integral to understanding yoga and the development of the yoga development of the mind in terms of coming to the perception, the conviction of the unified nature of all things. It deals with the theory of perception, which was largely used by Adi Shankara in explaining how perception is wrong, and it contains actually in chapter 3 contains a beautiful verse about Vivekina, the person who has attained spiritual discrimination. And again, everything seems to point to the development of an Advaita perspective on life. And then it talks about mind as an unconscious instrument. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi emphasized this strongly. Mind actually deals with things as a result of previous experience, and it doesn't contain manas. It doesn't contain in and of itself elements of freedom. And now I'm sure I'm getting to the end. So this is the path to Kaivalya, and the end of the verse, Pada, describes Kaivalya, which Maharishi used the word singularity. And I once approached a gentleman I met at the University of Pune in 2006. And I said he was a leading scholar on the interpretation of Kashmir Shaivism. And I said to him, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi translated the word Kaivalya as singularity. What do you think of that? And Sanjeevan Rastogi's answer to me was, he thought about it for a moment. He said, that's absolutely perfect. So I don't have to apologize for that. So here we are, a review of the 4 padas, Samadhi pada, Sadhana pada, the practices, Vibhuti pada, developing the higher spiritual attainments, Kaivalya pada, progressive stages to spiritual liberation. And Kaivalya, I'm translating here not as, believe it or not, singularity, which is an alternative translation, but human emancipation. So there we are. Thank you very much. This was the JNU seminar on philosophy, science, and values. And I'm extraordinarily grateful for having the privilege to make this presentation before you. I would like to particularly thank both Professor Singh, Balram Singh, who spoke before me, and Professor J.P. Singh. So thank you very, very much. I hope I haven't gone too far over time.
Thank you very much, Professor Alex. And in fact, your presentation will complement the philosophy and also the scientific quests, and it will, harmonize everything together and leading towards human emancipation. Now we have the speaker, Professor Harishankar Prasad. He is professor and former dean of the Faculty of Arts of University of Delhi, and he was chairman of the Board of Studies in Humanities and EC member of the Delhi University. He has published 7 books, and the one book which has acclaimed international fame is The Centrality of Ethics in Buddhism. And he has got several articles, 40 research articles in national and international journal. And at present, he is working on Sailing Against the Current, the Buddha, Buddhism and Methodology. This is one project he is working on, the book. And the other one is Indian Theories of Consciousness. So Professor H.S. Prasad, so he will be speaking on Paramitas and social life, giving the ethical dimension very substantially to this webinar. So because this is the way that we have thought about it. So over to you, Professor Prasad. Not audible, you have to unmute yourself. Unmute yourself. That's right.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me, for giving me an opportunity here. The theme I have, it's a very broad theme, and it's very difficult for me to cover its entire history. So this actually, it's in brief, we can say that it's all about Bodhisattva ideal. The ideal which covers all sorts of suffering sentient beings, and it carries with it all sorts of values and virtues which are personal, social, and civilizational. So this is in brief. See, I have for 50 years, I have been studying philosophy since 1971, but still I'm not sure whether I have understood everything correctly. Anyway, since I have very little time, so I have to go faster. My way of doing things is that I would prefer to begin at the beginning. There is a sutta, Arya Pariyeshan Sutta, which is an autobiographical description of Buddha's experiences. And that is actually the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, which was the first discourse. What is that? 20 years back, or more than that, when I was reading this sutta, Arya Pariyeshan Sutta, his autobiographical details, I noticed that there is one word which is very important for me to understand the entire Buddhism, and that is that what happened that when he got enlightenment, he was very relaxed, of course, very satisfied, and his two teachers, Alar Kalam and Uddan Ramputta, had deserted him. This was, and he was left alone. But then he wanted to share with somebody who could understand his experiences. But he came to know that both of them were dead. So he decided not to share with anybody, not to teach anybody. And for the simple reason that he considered his realization as very difficult, in the sense that it was going against the stream. Going against the stream, and if so he was in a you can say dilemma whether to teach or not to teach. If he teaches, nobody will understand. If he does not teach, then it will not be in favor, it will not carry social welfare scheme, something like this one. That is one. So I start with this one, and then I realized that Patisotgami is something like that, that suppose you are sitting in your society and somebody suffers a heart attack, and you have already a car or ambulance. Even the hospitals are available on both sides of the road, whether left or right, or but at the same time there is a procession, religious procession, which is passing through that. And what happens in that case, that both sides of the road are occupied by the people. Now a person is very much in difficulty and the patient is about to die, and in that case he cannot do anything, because he wants to go against the gathering or through the gathering. So that was the situation, and that is actually the meaning of the Patisotgami. He is selling against the current. So this is. Now what I have 4 or 5 sections, or you can just 6 in the conclusion, that I'm starting with the striking and instructive statements of the Buddha in the Sutta literature. So I'm starting with the Sutta literature, and after that maybe there's some Abhidharma points, and then the Madhyami, and ultimately I shall land in the Yogacara, which is which I have not covered in this case. Now, what is that one? They are very important for me. So at different times, Buddha was asked certain questions and he gave in very brief. So it's something like that. He made a statement just as in the great ocean, there is but one taste, and that is the taste of salt. So in my doctrine and discipline, there is but one taste, and that is the taste of freedom from suffering, that is vimukti ras. Number two is that somebody asked him, and he was so irritated because he thought that the Buddha was teaching nonsense. He was denying the existence of God and soul and whatnot. So he was very irritated. That Pandit was very irritated, and he said that only in 2 words you summarize your teaching. So he said that Vidyacharan, any Vidya or Acharan. So knowledge and moral purity. So he ended his teaching entirely. At another time, somebody came and again asked him very harshly that, who are you? Do you think that you are a god? Buddha kept silent. And then again he insisted and then said that no. Are you a semi-god? He said that no. Are you a demon? Said that no. Are you a human being at least? Buddha said that no. Then he was very, very angry. He said that, then what is your identity? What do you think about yourself? He said that I am enlightened, I am a Buddha. The next one is that he said many disciples came to him to help him to get nirvana, or maybe that they were looking for blessings from me to directly enter into nirvana. Then he said that I am not I'm not a mokshadata. I am a margadata. Actually, I can show you the path, but I cannot offer you liberation or nirvana. The next one is at another time that he said that the world is at war with me. I am not at war with the world. Again, next one is that some people wanted him to show that whatever teaching he was giving us, it should be justified. And say that one can see, judge, and verify truthfulness of my practical teaching here itself. That is ehipasik. The next one is that this is also very important, and that is, one is one's own refuse. The meaning is that every human being is responsible for his own destiny as per the curve-fall mechanism, because nobody will help him in this matter. In the same way, the Buddha tells his most favorite attendant, Anand, in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, that only his Dhamma will take care of everybody after his demise. So he will say, Anand need not worry for future. Buddha say, therefore, Anand, dwell making yourself your island, support, making yourself, not anyone else, your refuge, making the Dhamma your island or support, the Dhamma your refuge, nothing else your refuge. Now, there is another one which is not directly said by him, but that is the one indirectly he has mentioned, that the Buddha believes in the notion of common humanity. And I have coined a phrase that common humanity is the community of sufferers. So these are in brief some of the statements, and very important for me to guide me how to read Buddhist philosophy. Now, what I have, again, I have taken Nikaya doctrines and ethics, because Nikaya doctrines and ethics and Abhidhamma, already it's very much there, but I have not explicitly discussed Abhidhamma or Abhidharma literature. So Nikaya doctrines and ethics are very important, because there is I believe that, and that is true also in my view, that these are the roots from which all other schools, Buddhist schools have developed. So Nikaya doctrines and ethics is very important for us to know at least. The Buddha's number one, the Buddha's enlightenment and its contents. Universal law of conditioned arising, Paticca Samuppada, most of you must be knowing, but I just try to mention them, that you see how does Buddhism develop historically and doctrinally. Formula of Four Noble Truths, Arya Satya, including Eightfold Path, Arya Ashtangic Marg, three characteristics of the reality theory, that is three Lakshan, the middle path, Majjhima Patipada, and the practice of the social emotions, Brahma Vihara. Number two, dynamic and fluxional nature of the reality and existence. Number three, goals of life and evolutionary process. Number one, preparatory conditions, more, and they are moral purity, contemplation, and intuitive insight, Sil, Samadhi, Panya. Number two, and the goals are limited practice of the Bodhisattva ideas and the practice of selective virtues, Paramita. And that is about Nikaya literature. And number three, achievement of the status of Arhat, equivalent to the Buddha, and attainment of permanent Nibbana without a return to the world, that is, end of the cycle of rebirth, which makes him selfish, leaving behind the remaining humanity. Number four, methodology of elevating the human consciousness, Satipatthana, Vipassana, and Jhana process. Number five, strict normative practices of the five precepts, that is a Sil, and Eightfold Path, Ashtanga Magga, endowed with the three aspects, Sil, Samadhi, Panya. Number six, two kinds of Buddhist ethics, Nikaya ethics and Mahayana ethics, and in between there are lots of other forms of ethics, especially in Abhidharma and Yogachar, Vigyanbad. The two kinds of Buddhist ethics, Nikaya ethics and Mahayana ethics, I have focused on these two, and I have tried to talk about their similarities and differences, which lie in their doctrinal orientations and perspective. But of course, please remember that there is a continuity also. The next topic is, subtopic is, three progressive vehicles, Yan and their merger into Ek Yan. Number one, Shravak Yan. This is a spiritual path or vehicle which stands for those common people and disciples of the Buddha who are not or cannot be competent to follow the doctrines and the methodology of the Buddha's discourses. They can neither read the path of meditation, they can neither trade the path of meditation, that is dhyan or jhan, nor attain enlightenment because of the lack of intuitive insight into nature, into the true nature of reality, that is pragya. But they can strictly and sincerely practice the five precepts, cultivation of sublime social emotions like Maitri, Karuna, Mudita, Upeksha, and charity, Dan, Paramita. Unlike the monks and nuns, they are certainly spiritually innocent and incompetent people, but they are the fully devoted to the Buddha for his guidance and refuse. It is true that they are, of course, in the vast majority and the most sufferer. In this critical situation, Buddha directly comes to help them to overcome their suffering and devises a simple method which is equally effective for attaining liberation. It is to be noted that every Shravak or Upasak who is a layman and also a householder can be a Bodhisattva and excel in the practice of some of the paramitas like Dan and Shil for the welfare of others, and they can earn enough merits, punya, from them. However, they are inferior, that is hin. Hin word, please remember, because it comes much later in Ashtangas time. Inferior in comparison to the fully developed Bodhisattva career in respect of knowledge, scope, dedication, and self-sacrifice. In this sense, they are at the lower level of the ladder. That's why their spiritual path is called Hinayan, which is not a derogatory epithet. Note that a Shravak lives in a social community to take care of others' suffering, and as a result, he has earned merits, or his earned merits qualify him, attain a good chance to be reborn in a happy condition. Number 2, Pratyek Buddhayan. Unlike the Shravakas, the Pratyek Buddhas are not common. They are very few, rather they are rare and alone and outside the domain of the social community and without a spiritual guide. For these reasons, they are condemned for being selfish, for not being engaged in the general public or in the service of the general public. However, their path is derogatively designated as Pratyek Buddhayan. Number 3, Bodhisattvayan. Bodhisattvayan is alternatively called Mahayan or Tathagatayan. We all know that before becoming the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautam lived a Bodhisattva life in numerous previous births as a precondition to become the Buddha. Thus, the Bodhisattva state is the penultimate state to the acquisition of the supremely perfect enlightenment, Anuttara Samma Sambodhi. He is a human being, that is Sattva, who has the Buddha knowledge, that is Buddha Gyan, and the matching essential character of extreme sensitivity and compassion towards the suffering of other sentient beings to such an extent that he deliberately suspends his entering into the state of permanent nirvana, despite attaining the perfect qualification for the same. He is known for a strongly committed vows, resolve, and their strict practices, despite having the aspiration of attaining the status of the Buddha, Shil, Samadhi, Pragya, Karuna, and so on. Bodhisattva's ethics of compassion, as per his vows, to help liberate all sentient beings from the suffering endlessly. He has full freedom in both the worlds, Sansar and Nirvana, to live and act and exercise his free choice to descend to or reborn in the world of suffering. The Bodhisattva has excelled and perfected himself in the virtuous practices of all kinds of paramitas, which are regulated by the predominance of compassion, karuna, to such an extent at times that unlike the monks, nuns, Shravakas, and Pratyek Buddhas, he violates even the non-negotiable 5 precepts on the one hand, and on the other hand, he is always ready to endanger his own life and the life of his family for the sake of social welfare. Contrary to these characteristics of the Bodhisattva, the Shravak and the Pratyek Buddhas have limited scope of the practice of the paramitas, and they have strictly focused on the aspiration of attaining nirvana. The Mahayana doctrines, ethics, and methodology are considered as a paradigm shift within Buddhism, especially in their ethics from egoism to altruism. Mahayana doctrinal tenets, pragya, shunyata, nisvabhavta, sarvadrishti shunyata, dharma nairatmya, non-difference between sansara and nirvana, these are very important points to understand. Preparatory roles of moral purity, contemplation, samadhi, intuitive insight, pragya, emptiness, compassion, karuna, these are the generic, you can say the collective generic background. Besides achieving the perfection of virtues, in some cases they are listed as 6, in another they are 10, but they are interrelated. Now let us analyze the nature and cultivation of the Bodhisattva's mind and thought. They are very important, and these are discussed in many texts like Bodhi Charya Avatar in Shanti Dev and its commentaries. Number 1, thought of enlightenment. It should be, that is Bodhicitta, that is the starting point. That is, at least there is some thought to start with. Number 2, seizing of the thought of enlightenment. To grasp this one, to stick to the Bodhicitta Parigraha. Number 3, thought of the vow of enlightenment, very important, which makes the Bodhisattva determined, and that is a Bodhi Pranidhana Chitta. Next one is moving towards enlightenment. Now he has started the journey towards the enlightenment, Bodhi Prasthana Chitta. And then confession of sin. He has this kind of tendency that is called Papa Desana. The last one in this one is that transference of merit to others, Parinamana, out of compassion. It's a wonderful thing. It's a very, whatever he has, he wants to sacrifice for the sake of others. Bodhisattva's ascent to Nirvana and descent to the world, suspension of his transcendental Nirvana to serve the suffering humanity as his religious social duty. Now, next one is that these are the 3 yanas, and it is actually, they are not conflicting with each other. There are differences in their presentation, orientation, and focus. So there is the 4th one, that is called Ekyan, synthesis of all yanas. We can clearly observe that Buddha's original doctrines, moral disciplines, and social engagement are very much accommodated throughout the development of all schools and practices. However, their differences are in respect of certain modifications and progressive practices and commitment to serve the suffering sentient being as per their needs in the range from lower to higher, higher to highest levels. Thus, there is an integrated continuity throughout the Buddhist tradition. Note that all the main streams of Buddhism, Nikaya, Theravada, Madhyamik, and Yogacara, apart from other schools, justify their changes in their doctrines, spiritual path, and social commitments, along with their 3 different formulations of Dharmachakra Pravartan Sutta. Actually, you see, this is also very interesting, and against this background, against this claim, they have their change, transformation of their theories and practice. It is also to be noted that in the early Buddhism, the Buddha's doctrines, disciplines, and methodologies are highly strict, which in Mahayana tradition are gradually diluted and made flexible to serve the interests of the common man, that is Shravaka. That's why the Bodhisattva Yan is reconciled with the Shravaka Yan. Now the last issue, meaning and kinds of paramita, and that I have kept actually towards the end so that the meaning is clear against the background. Meaning and kinds of the paramita, virtue ethics, and the ethics of compassion. Etymologically, according to the Bodhisattva Bhumi, as Hardayal has mentioned, he quotes, paramita is derived from param. The paramitas are so called because they are acquired during a long period of time, that is parmena kalena samudgata, and are supremely pure in their nature. Paramaya swabhava vishuddhya vishuddha. They also transcend the virtues or qualities of the Shravakas and the Pratyek Buddhas and lead to the highest result. Param cha phalam anuprayachanti. Further, in the Madhyamik Mahayana tradition, a revolutionary way of Buddhist Yan is established, which addresses the entire world of the sentient beings who are undergoing suffering. Unlike the Shravak and Pratyek Buddha Yanas, the Bodhisattva Yan is grounded in 3 foundational factors: wisdom, that is pragya, emptiness, shunyata, and compassion, karuna, which collectively give rise to the enlightened consciousness, bodhicitta, which in turn becomes the fountain of the bodhisattva to dissolve to endlessly serve the community of the sufferer, apart from other paramitas, 10 to 12, you can say, resolves, and achievement of the excellence in 6 or 10 spiritual virtues. Paramita. The total impact of these factors makes bodhisattva more committed and courageous, and more sacrificing in his own interest to serve others. Murti remarks, the Paramita way is distinguished from the other disciplines of the Hinayan in 3 important respects. Number 1, the replacement of the Arhat by the Bodhisattva ideal. Number 2, the liberation of the old Sil Samadhi Pragya stadia of spiritual discipline into the 6-fold path of Paramita, Dan, Sil, Chanti, Virya, Dhyan, and Pragya. And number 3, the minuter analysis of the highest stages of spiritual life in the bhumis or planes of yoga culmination in complete Buddhahood. These revolutionize the ideal. They impart a unity and universality never known before in spiritual life. Close, quotation close. In another list, 4 more kinds of paramitas are added: Upay, Kaushalya, Pranidhan, Bal, and Gyan. It is not possible to discuss here these 10 paramitas. The last paragraph, general characteristics of the paramitas as explained by they are. Certain general characteristics are ascribed to all the paramitas as a group. They are sublime, disinterested, supremely important, and imperishable. They lead to welfare, happy rivers, serenity, unremitting spiritual cultivation, successful concentration, and the highest knowledge. They are free from contamination by sensual pleasure, partiality, love of reward, and culpable self-complacency. They are placed in this order as they imply one another and form a progressive scheme of action. The practice of each paramita is impossible without the cultivation of the preceding one. Each perfection has 3 degrees. It may be ordinary, extraordinary, or superlatively extraordinary. The good, better, and best. This shows the progressive development according to the requirement of the suffering person or the humanity. Now, the last one, which I have not taken up because I think that I have completed half an hour, the Yogachar Mahayana or Paramita and the Bodhisattva altruism, and all these are in a very different way. In a very different way, they have manners maybe quite different from the Madhyamika approach, and that is Yogachar Shastra, and where the Bodhisattva adopts the Shravakayan actually. The Bodhisattva Bhumi adopts actually the Shravak Bhumi, because that is the field of action actually for practicing Paramita. So I stop here. Thank you very much again. I was a little faster. I could have explained further, but anyway, this is the time which I have been given. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Professor Prasad. I know this is stuff you are presenting, out of your lifelong learning, and it cannot be just, brought to a 30 minutes presentation and all that. I can understand those things, but still you have stimulated our ideas, and some questions are also coming up. I'm just informed that Professor Raghuram Raju is also organizing one lecture series at 4:35. He has to leave, and we still have some times. So if there is any question or query which anybody is having to the presentation of Professor Raghuram Raju, so one can raise the question because in the chat bot, I don't see any kind of a question. So I have just one brief query with, to Professor Raju's presentation, because of KCB's text, which he has taken up in the 3 dimensions of responsibility, emotion, and the competence. And of course, the way the Western philosophy was intervening, I in fact appreciated, particularly in the Bengali intellectual circle, and the way KCB was trying to respond to it. So that thing is there. But some of his, predecessor contemporaries like Brajendra Seal, who prepared the first draft for MA philosophy course in Calcutta University, or Sri Aurobindo, who was trying to, repudiate the charges labeled by William Archer on Indian tradition, culture, knowledge, situation, and everything else. And of course, the nationalist movement, you took it up, those kinds of things. So would you like to make some reflection of the actual intellectual tradition within which KCB grew up, and try to define for or against that with Swarajin ideas, so decolonizing human mind? Professor Raghuram Raju.
Yeah, thank you for this. What I presented is one protocol.
Yeah.
And my point is that there is a need to identify, to begin with, other areas, and then do a lot of making available work, not start expecting a ready-made work. See, this is an additional work that one has to do if you are doing a contemporary Indian philosophy. So I presented one model, and there is a need to do the similar thing to each of them. So it is in this context, I think, I'm not saying this only with regard to K.C. Bhattacharya, but as one who seems to have taken some very bold moves, very, very bold moves. For instance, Professor Seal's work is about the drafting of the syllabus. But then what is the syllabus that you are drafting? Okay, the method of a new method that you require so that those contents are available to be put on the syllabus. Okay, that required a different kind of an angle. That required a different kind of a direction. And I think the KCB has displayed that very well. And and as I said, that it is possible, it is necessary that we revisit, to visit each one of them and do the similar exercise. Thank you.
There is one question which has come from Bullokano, one of our PhD student, that the question is, do you agree with K.C. Bhattacharya and that Kant identifies thinking with knowledge? I ask this because Kant does make comments in critique of pure reason, such as one cannot know freedom but think freedom. This does so that Kant does not take knowing to be identical to thinking. The difference between knowing and thinking, schematized and unschematized categories, or postulating freedom, not trying to knowing about it. So would you like to respond to it?
Yeah, see, this is something that several people in a conversational mode said in response to KCB. But what is important is that there is a need to study KCB very systematically, and then identify the charge that he's making against the Kant, and check with reference to the kind of points that the KCB is making, whether those points are correct or not, and then to what extent they are correct and to what extent they are not correct. This needs not just verbal comments, but a very detailed research presentations.
So that's all. Is there anybody else who wants to ask anything?
May I
Yeah, please.
one
please.
doubt.
Please.
It's not my area, but anyway, since we read lots of things here and there, Vedant, Kant, and KCB. Now, whether KCB has said anything about the problem of problem arising from the nature of thing in itself?
Sir,
Whether he
see,
has tried to solve this one from
yes.
the
That is, he's not only solved, he's taking head on. He's taking, see, he's reading Western philosophy very carefully. And he's then identifying the limitations, not just sentimental limitations, but logical limitations. I mean, the point that he makes between thinking and knowing, and then brings in Indian philosophy as a solution to solve Western problems. You know, it is not a small, I mean, it looks very adventurous. That Professor Prasad is exactly the point that is available in him. You will disagree with him, but there is a need to engage with him in a systematic manner and show that he is wrong.
Perhaps what Professor Prasad is asking, the way Schopenhauer tried to articulate thing in itself, and the way Jacobi had said that with the thing in itself, without the thing itself, you cannot go to Kant's philosophy, but with it, you cannot come out. There's a huge difference, these two articulations.
Yeah, but see, one advantage KCB has over Schopenhauer is that his reading of Vedanta is a very, very, penetrating reading of Vedanta. I'm using this word in a very, very cautious manner. He doesn't read Vedanta the way in which other people have read it. He read Vedanta keeping in mind that he is looking for solutions in Vedanta for Western problems. So his reading of Vedanta is not to read Vedanta, but to find, to shop for solutions to Western problems. This is it's a political kind of strategy.
There is one question which has come from Professor Balram Singh.
Okay.
Maybe he can ask orally, but the question he has sent is, as to your note that it is very difficult to articulate Indian philosophy in Western terms, is it an ontological problem or that of the epistemology, or is it a continuation of intellectual colonialism?
Yeah, thank you for asking this. It is basically a metaphysical problem involving political background, which is colonialism. And K.C. Bhattacharya seriously thinks that you need to force fit West Indian philosophical ideas into Western idea. I use the word force fit, okay? That's because he say, according to him, if you are really fighting against colonialism, then if you write only in Sanskrit or in Telugu or any vernacular languages, or some other thing, it will not reach your adversary. So but if without reaching your adversary, your attack will not reach them. So he's bent on force fitting this new thing, which we also find in S. Radhakrishna and others, where they have tried to present Indian philosophy not in Indian philosophical idiom, but Indian philosophy in a Western idiom, in order to accomplish this pragmatic thing, namely telling the Western philosophers that we also have a philosophy. Because the Western philosophers were telling Indians, you don't have a philosophy, that's why we need to rule you, the Macaulay's thing. So here is a pushback, an attack, which says that we have our own philosophy, so you don't have to rule us, we will rule ours, despite our internal problems of various problems that we have and things like that. That's a point that I think I will submit.
Thank you very much, Professor Raghuram Raju, for sparing so much of time with us. Yeah. And we'll have again maybe a full session with you, so that many issues can be clarified. So thanks a lot. I know you are
Thanks.
preoccupied.
Thanks. Yeah.
So still, I think 2-3 minutes are there. If anybody
Yeah.
penetrating question, Alex, do you want to say something? Okay, I think everybody is satisfied, happy, and we are also very feeling proud of you having here. So thank you very much, Professor Raju.
Thank you, sir. Sorry for leaving early because there's something.
I can understand you have organized another event and you have to be there. So all the best for that event. So thanks a lot. Now there is a question to Professor Prasad that is Kant's Enlightenment project something equivalent to Buddhist enlightenment?
Oh,
so
not at
because,
all. Anyway.
Because the enlightenment generally in the Western tradition we study with Immanuel Kant only.
Yeah.
But when we come to Indian philosophy, we find that this term was used long back in the Buddha, in Buddhism. So he just wants to know. Now the person, actually the name is missing. So can you speak something on it?
Actually, this word is enlightenment, light से enlightenment बना हुआ है. So something that actually we prefer to use awakening. It's a very different kind of awakening, to know the reality as it is. As it is. And for example, in his Bodhi or in his enlightenment, the contents was the realization of dependent arising. There is no permanent, there is no single reality in itself. So that kind of thing. Awakening is a very suitable term, but enlightenment is also used in a very different sense. Very, very different. Nothing to do with Kant.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So particularly in the West, there is a reawakening, that is Renaissance.
No.
And enlightenment comes after Renaissance. That has a different historicity and contextuality. So there is a Dr. Chand Bharadwaj who wants to speak on what Professor Balramji has presented. So Professor Bharadwaj, you are there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, please.
And thank you very much for giving me this small opportunity.
Please be brief and have a pointed question, yeah?
Okay. No, it is not a question, it is all, bringing everything together on which we've been discussing since long, that it is regarding the philosophies. So since I'm connected with very many academies of sciences all over, so I thought that I should present my area. I did meet you also long back in JNU. I visited your place when Balramji was there. Okay, anyhow, now I would like to convey that we have developed a philosophy of co-aim theory and practice, which is correlation of attention, information, and material. Attention, we are trying to say that it is the outer expression of the creative intelligence, which we may call as soul, which is connected to its source in real time. And information, I means information, which is your mind, which deals with the information system and laws of nature and the material body. Now here, looking into all the philosophies, which is really creating a mess in the whole world and trying to, they are trying to rule the other countries, the Western world. And sometimes the Indian philosophy is not there to tell you, as the point was coming up, that we don't have our philosophy. We have. So let me explain that part. The visible universe is now visible, and that huge big ball kind of a thing having billions of stars and galaxies in it have got floating material bodies made out of 100 and odd elements. And the universal mind, which operates it with gravitational magnetic fields and nuclear forces, etc., is the universal mind, which is embedded with information system 2G, 3G, 6G internet, and the laws of nature in it, plus the absolute intelligence capable force, which is energizing. I would like to comment on that. It is particle and wave theory, which energizes the whole field and everything.
Excuse me, Professor Bharadwaj.
Yes,
I will organize a lecture by you because it requires a kind of a thing, yeah? But if you have any question, please ask, because we have got number of questions coming up. And
only only one question, sir, that let
Yes,
us
please.
work together to bring everything together, one philosophy, because there are 16 major religions and all those philosophies.
Yeah.
We are 7 point odd billion people on this earth, so we are all confused. So it is better we can work together to bring one based on science and logic.
Yes, very ambitious project, and we'll definitely look forward your way of looking at it. And I know that you have done it,
Right.
substantive work in
Thank
that connection. And I'll look forward, to have your special session. So
you.
there is a
It will be
question
great.
by
Thank
Dr.
you very much.
Prashant Shukla, and he says, I don't know whom he is addressing the question to, but perhaps he is addressing to everybody. The issue whether Indians have a philosophy or not has been alleged quite seriously by W.T. Stace, Albert Schweitzer, as well as, Dale Ripe. The responses given by Radhakrishnan, Dayakrishna, P.T. Raju, Krishnamurthy are quite interesting as well. Thank you for your addressing on the topic. That's a kind of, thing he had it. So not a especially kind of a question. So there is, it was just a kind of observation. He had it. So
I think there is
yes.
a
And
always.
now would you like to respond to what Dr. Chand Bharadwaj has said? And because the project is very ambitious, and let us see how it works about it. Professor Balram Singh,
Yeah, thank you. I think to
your voice is a little less louder, because if you put some mic or to be closer to the, you know,
okay. Well,
laptop.
maybe
Yes.
it's more audible now. Is that better?
Yeah, little better.
What about other people? Maybe Dr. RP Singh is not able to hear me. But what about others? Are you able to hear me?
Yeah,
Clear, clear,
Yes,
clear.
yes.
voice is
Okay.
clear.
Maybe you need to increase your
Volume.
audio a little bit. So what I was saying, I think this question has been coming since I started learning about philosophy, that Indians don't have philosophy. Maybe the Indians don't, because I mean, what is wrong with accepting that we don't have philosophy? Why are we going to be defined by philosophy? Philosophy, by definition, like I said, what I found etymology is, something that is that's related to wisdom. You create, you like to have wisdom. So I mean, I don't know whether when it comes to practicality, I again had an experience with Professor Chandra, and again it was organized by Dr. RP Singh. When I presented something not related to what I presented here today, something about consciousness, and he said it was lovely. Whatever I talked was fantastic, except that it's not philosophy. So there is some level of epistemology as to how they define it versus how do we define. I think they define the process in beginning, and Indians define most towards the end what happens. Like itihas. This is how it happened. So, but there is no doubt that there is a process involved in how it happened. So I think this is very important to argue like that, and I think the discussion that Professor Prasad had, and also Dr. Professor Raju had, all these things really come to that, where we need to address the idea of East and West, not necessarily very different, like science and philosophy, not very different, but the idea that philosophy ends when some solution is found. That's how the Western world looks at. They think that philosophy is something that you can keep talking about it, all kind of ideas. I mean, despite Dr. Chand Bharadwaj saying that we need to come up with one, it is impossible. I mean, I think that itself is going to be defeating, because you will never be able to have one. So I think you have to accept that the only one is going to be that we will have many. The one philosophy we can have is that we will have many, and let's all accept that we will have all many, because we are all human beings and we are so different. There is nobody like me before, like me after. There's nobody is going to be that in any possible way. So individually, everybody is going to be satisfied. I mean, we eat individually food, we have health. So then, but we all understand that everybody else also eats food and everybody else also has food. Otherwise, it looks like very foolish. And everybody is going to be believing in only one of them. And so my feeling is that the philosophy, whether we have or not, I think it's like giving you a tag. The moment we are tagged, we somehow have to respond to it. We don't. I mean, they have a lot of problems. I think I like this idea of the presentation that Dr. Prasad had, is that, let them deal with the problem. Then, Buddha had a solution, I had an idea, and then, many people are copying it, whether they like it or not, they accept it or not, doesn't matter. And then even what we have today, I'm a professor of chemistry, and whatever I think today, that doesn't mean that I created it. It has been there before. Long before what is Western people call themselves philosophers, a lot of things existed. They just coined it in some ways. And what we need to do, having 1.4 billion people in India, and 600 million of them very, very young, less than 35-year-old. I mean, I think they can overwhelm the whole world by talking about what Indian solutions are. But then we have to somehow get out ourselves from this imprisonment that somehow we have to convince everything that Western world asks. And in that last point, I want to make that people like me, there are 25 million Indian diaspora, and there are about 3 million in America. I think we can make a huge impact on this process, because and it is actually happening. Americans are about 30% of them are practicing yoga. 35% of them believe in reincarnation. 35% of them do cremation now. They don't bury anymore. They're not thinking of somebody. Somebody will come and wake them up, and then they will be going to heaven. So there is this an internet and virtual conversation like this is going to be only helpful. Thank you.
Sir, I just want to mention one small little point, Dr. Balram, that all the religions are philosophies. So the bases are the same everywhere I could find. It is like light and the word was made flesh, like Noor and Kalma, like Naad and Shabad, the Jyoti Swarup, Jyoti and Shruti Marg. So keeping those things in mind, we can bring in something together which can be covering all the philosophies in that particular aspect. And then people will look for Indian philosophy where all this knowledge is available. So I'm trying to give certain clues to all of them with that common thing which is acceptable to all. Thank you.
Thank you.
सिंह साहब, हमको 3 सेंटेंस बोलना है, आप समय
हाँ जी,
दीजिए।
मैं आ रहा हूँ।
डॉक्टर साहब को बोल देने दीजिए पूरा।
Professor Balram, you finish it first.
I just said that I absolutely agree, and this is where I think science comes in India. This is one of the weaknesses of Indian education system, that not everybody is required to learn science. In America, you have to have 6 credits in college to have to learn science before you graduate. So I think that's one of the things that very important. What I think India has, which I think no other country has, in their constitution, it says the duty of every citizen to develop a scientific temper. And I say very unfortunate. I think it's a philosophy professors and academicians, people, places like JNU should bring this out, that everybody needs to have a scientific understanding, and that is not different from philosophy. Philosophy is just very, very important part of science. I wouldn't be able to do all the things, many things that I could do otherwise if I didn't have interaction with Professor R.P. Singh and many other philosophers, that I reinforce my science. So I think that I agree, but then this caveat is that we need to create a better understanding. Professor Prasad, I'm sorry I took your time. Please.
No, it's okay. I'm learning from you. No problem. So should I?
Yes, please.
Take 1 minute or so. You see, there is one thing we usually know. There are as many philosophies as there are ways of doing philosophy. That is one. The second one is that from Indian literature, at one point, Kumaril's verse is borrowed by Shantarakshi. And the first line is that, Sugato yadi sarvagya kapilo nasti ka parma. अगर सुगत जो है, अगर वो omniscient है, तो कपिल नहीं है. ये question that is raised by Kumari. The last one is Chandrakirti's line, very interesting, in his commentary on the Madhyama Karika of Nagarjuna. Yad yasya priyam तत् तत् तस्य समाचरेत्। जिसको जिसको जहां अच्छा लगता है वैसा वह आचरण करता है। अगर भारद्वाज जी को अच्छा लगता है तो वैसा आचरण कर लें, प्रसाद को अच्छा लगता है तो वो आचरण कर लें। So there is a choice factor, because if there is something coherent, there are so many arguments and theses, etc., or presentation which are very coherent, consistent, rational, very convincing. So some people are happy, some people are not happy. So this is this one Chandrakirti's line appeals to me very much. There is a variety also, and at a different levels, different theories. That's okay.
Thank you. There is a question to Professor Alex. Shyam Sundar has asked this question, that how does each level of Sampragyat Samadhi lead more towards Asampragyat Samadhi? Could you please elaborate this point? Professor Alex, you are here?
Yes, he's here.
So I think
He's there, but I mean, he's not.
yeah, he has left. Maybe that's the time. So, but anyway, I'll forward this question to him, and he can reply it back. So is there anybody else who wants to say anything? So any question to any of the speakers?
Prashant is trying to say something, but we
Prashant?
cannot. Or maybe he's talking to somebody else. Okay.
So I think it has been, yeah, yes, Prashant. Go ahead.
That is just in continuity to Professor Balram Singh sir's very learned comment. Of course, it is quite okay that we can say that different people have different styles of doing philosophy. But what I want to say here is that most of the time, Western commentators advocate Indian philosophy on three grounds. The first is that you are being too poetical in your explanation. Second, you are being soteriological. And third, because of being transcendental, you do not give much emphasis to the field of morality. Now, my simple claim is that even if you go to Plato, he has been as poetic as they claim Indians to be. There is the issue of soteriology in Republic as well. And finally, even if we are talking about transcendentalism, still time and again we come back to the moral issues. So all the allegations are visibly going against the same commentator, and that is why we are doing philosophy in the same spirit as the Westerners are doing. Sir, your remarks, sir? Thank you, sir.
Yes, Professor Balram, you want to say something, because he is just confirming the position, and
I agree. I think it is. I think there was a Professor Prasad, Professor Raju also mentioned some of it is really political, and so and which is very, very important for people to know that just because they say so, that doesn't make it right. I mean, some of it is there is a colonial legacy. The whole system that we have, education system, for example, it is a system that we have borrowed. So there is a syllabus. Who says that there is such a should be a syllabus? Who says that? They say that. I mean, Indians have had a huge amount of success in life, material and metaphysical. And there is, I always say this, all this greatness of everybody, but nobody has a Indian Ocean type. Nobody has a British Ocean. Nobody has American Ocean. I mean, it might sound like, well, what does that matter? Well, it matters because, when I say I'm from Boston, it matters because people think, oh, this person is from Boston. It has an image. So India had an image, and somehow our generation, a generation before me, also maybe even 1,000 generation before me, lost it. Somehow we lost it. And one of the things that in my opinion, very important, that we are trying to become like them. For example, we want to become nationalists ourselves. Also, we want to be nationalists. Well, who created the idea of nation? We didn't create the idea of nation. They created the idea of nation. Who created the idea of parliament? Who created the idea of governance? Who created the idea of laws? What were the laws? I mean, we consider Ram Raj as one of the ideal. What were the laws I would like? I'm looking for laws in Ram Raj. I don't find it. So when I've said this before, when people talk about morality and they talk about ethics, when these things fail, when you do not have niti, when the niti doesn't work, then somehow you have to have laws. Because if I were going to do everything right, then it will not be there. You don't need to have laws. But why am I not doing right? Why am I doing something wrong? Because the Indian concept of service, you can never do anything wrong in service. It's just absolutely not possible. If you're going to serve somebody, even in today's, when doctors are not blamed if they are doing service to help you and somehow you die. So the point is Indian concept of service and the Western concept of disservice. They deserve. I say deserve. Disservice means they say that they deserve. You say that you serve. So it's a question of fight between serve and deserve. The Western one is they deserve everything, we only serve everything, and we are also trying to become deserved, and that obviously we will not have our own system. So I think this is very important for young people to know practically, and then practice. When you practice, there is no place on earth. I have traveled so many places in the world. There is no place, either geographically, historically, philosophically, socially, economically, materially, metaphysically, as great made as India. It's just not, I'm not saying because I'm born in India. I'm willing to defend this in front of anybody, and I have defended many of my Western friends, so very, very close, and they love it. And the whole world has loved India because of that. I think we just need to be what we are rather than we try to become somebody else.
Thank you very much, Professor Balram. And with this, we are now coming to the end of it. And may I now invite Dr. Ajay Verma, Associate Professor of our Center, to propose a vote of thanks.
Sir, someone is SS Pappu sir, he is raising his hand.
Who is, okay, I didn't see it actually. So we still have 1 minute. So yeah, ask him to come forward.
Yeah, Pappu sir, please unmute yourself and you can ask.
Okay.
Oh, great to see you, sir. You missed. So
yeah, sorry, I joined late. It's 7 o'clock in the morning here.
Yes, I can understand.
Yeah, anyway, last half an hour, I have been watching you guys, and only a small comment I want to make, that is concerning the very notion of philosophy, what Balram was talking. It was Albert Einstein who once said, the universe is not divided in the way the university departments are divided. The universe presents to us one whole, but the university departments chop it and say, this is my terrain and that is your terrain and so on. And so Balram is right in the sense that if you take an integral, what Aurobindo calls the integral vision, so we have come from the wholeness to the parts now these days, and again we have to go back to the whole. So that's why these days there are any number of subjects and things like that. We are talking about the integrative things and cross-cultural, cross everything, so that we are proceeding to the what originally philosophy was, that is the study of the whole. And I agree perfectly with Balram Singh. One of the defects of Indian education is we just don't study science. Okay? And just humanities means humanities, but you don't extend it. So that the ideal education, both in the high school and the college, must be very integrally. You should learn a bit of this, you will learn a bit of this one. Not that you will become a scholar, but you should know what other people are thinking, what are the, in other words, the ideas that transformed the world, at least they should be given these kinds of things, the ideas that, so that I have read a couple of books these days, the ideas that change the world. So likewise, people should know what are the ideas that have changed the world in politics, in science, and everything else. Okay, that's the final comment I want to make at the end. Nice to see you guys.
Yeah. Such a nice thing, and it has really
Surprise.
complemented. And we are also looking for this kind of a situation where oceans do not divide, rather they link with one another.
Yeah, that's
if
right.
If you stand up at the Mount Everest, you can see that Indic, Persian, Greek, Semitic religions, there is a chain of relationship, and not the division kind of a thing. So that
Yeah.
episode of division is gone now. Now
No,
the question is how to harmonize, integrate them.
Yeah,
Integrate
if you find two points, those 2 points, for example, you can look at it as that which is divided or that which is connected.
Yes.
The same 2 points, you can look at it as, okay, this point is separated from the other one, or you think that point is connected with the other one.
So
it is the fundamental problem.
we shall be looking that kind of integration between philosophy, science, and values also.
Yeah.
So, sir, we'll have you also there gradually in this theme, in this series of lectures and all that. And very nice to see you, and you're keeping
nice to see you.
and your green and a smiling face. So nice to see. So with this, now may I request Dr. Ajay to propose vote of thanks?
Yeah.
Dr. Ajay Verma.
Yeah. So like I've been given this task of formally, it's like sort of one of my teachers is also here as a speaker, so one cannot thank enough. One cannot thank one teachers enough in the entire life. But as a I have to do, as a part of as a formal activity. So I thank all the speakers. I sort of will begin with Professor Balram Singh, who has been associated with the Center for Philosophy for a long time now. So this is not the first time we're listening to him. It's just that this time he gave us sort of a new insight into sort of scientific method and how it relates to the way we conceptually investigate things within this philosophy, and thanks are also sort of due to Professor Ram Raju, who took up very different topic, but also at the same time he related it to the to the overall theme in view. So he sort of spoke about responsibility, emotions, and cognitive competence. And Professor Alexa Henke, we are sort of beholden to him for such a wonderful talk on yoga and emancipation. His presentation was very comprehensive. Hardly sort of any part of yoga philosophy that he didn't touch upon. Last but not the least, Professor H.S. Prasad for him speaking for enlightening us on some of the lesser known facts about the Pali literature. So he took up certain portions from Paramitas and then sort of related it to human life. And I would be remiss if I don't sort of thank the. First of all, I must thank Professor R.P. Singh also, because he took a lot of effort to put things together for to make it happen. And thank you so much to you too for making for celebrating Philosophy Day, which is a very sort of important event for all philosophers. And I would be remiss if I don't thank the agencies which provided us the platform, which includes, of course, Indian Council of Philosophical Research, School for Indic Studies, and also Institute for Advanced Sciences. And also to all the participants who listened to all the talks. Special thanks to Professor Papu, with whom I had a chance to meet long time back during a conference, and it was so nice. Came and sat beside me and sort of and chatted with me. That was really very encouraging. So very happy to see you, sir. Yeah.
Thank you.
So thank you so much, everyone. And so it was a proud moment for us, as a part of Center for Philosophy at JNU. And we leave with the thought that there would be more of these associations happening, which would materialize in such events. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Dr.
Thank you,
Ajay,
Ajay.
Yeah, bye.
So
Thank you, Singh sir.
now formally it is over, but we can stay back if you want. We can chit chat because Professor Ramala Papu is available and he can throw more lights on it. So, and sir, we would like to have you on some other occasion when you are free. So to have your full lecture, kind of a thing. And it's indeed
That's
very
okay.
great pleasure to have you. Yes, Professor Balram.
Yeah.
I just
But
wanted
Balram
to
is doing a lot of stuff,
thank
being
you,
in Delhi.
Professor. So nice to see you. So nice to you.
Yeah, nice to see you too. Anyway, thanks for informing me of all the things that are happening there.
This is fantastic. I want to also thank particularly Anuja Sinha, who from in the Institute of Advanced Sciences, who has taken responsibility to organize, coordinate some of the work, and also a student who both of them together have been managing from the back side of the scene, and of course other
No,
colleagues.
even otherwise, yeah, I am in touch with Sen Gupta, and then a couple of lectures he has organized are very good in the institute there. And anyway, when are you coming back?
Oh, I'm here.
Oh, you are oh, I see, you are in that.
I got up at 3:30.
Oh, but
I
I thought you were still in Delhi. No,
no. I'm back here. I'm back
when?
here. Yeah, no, I'm here in the.
Oh, I see. Okay. I thought you are still in Delhi.
My heart is in Delhi.
Okay. No, no, not these days because of the Zoom. You are everywhere. Sarvantaryami. Anyone can be a Sarvantaryami, right?
Yeah,
Because of the Zoom.
We all have become Devta. We can kahin bhi prakat ho jate hain.
Yeah.
No,
the Zoom has literally shrunk the world.
That's right.
Right? Yeah, you can have.
Descartes had said, "I think, therefore I am." We can say, "I share, therefore I am."
Yeah, that's
so
right.
we share the link, and therefore you are there.
We can be anywhere we want to because of the Zoom,
And because of the background that you can put, the computer background is you can put a background so nobody knows where you are. Actually,
no, that's right. That's right. And that's why the best thing is you are everywhere.
Yeah, everywhere. Now we have become Brahmasmi.
Yeah, right.
Omniscient, omnipresent.
Anyway, I'm glad that the School of Education in Delhi University has organized this one, and I saw the whole thing. So
philosophy is becoming more important nowadays, especially
I know.
People have to reflect more.
Philosophy develops the psychology, and psychology develops the behavior.
Yeah, very true. Very true. So that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay. Nice meeting all of you, and so we'll keep in touch. Okay.
Yeah,
sure. I want to thank Professor R.P. Singh particularly because he really
yes.
And coordinated with my group. Like I said,
yes, sir,
and Alok also. Also, I have colleagues, Aparna, Dheer Khandelwal and Umesh Singh also have joined from my institute and few other friends. So it's very nice to see the collaboration between the institute and And JNU, we have actually signed an MOU with the Vice Chancellor a couple of years ago. So this is all works in that direction. Fantastic.
Good.
All right.
Okay.
ठीक है, सबको नमस्कार।
Yeah. नमस्कार
नमस्ते।
नमस्कार
नमस्ते
नमस्ते
सब लोग
नमस्ते।
सब लोग स्वस्थ रहिए।
नमस्ते सर।
नमस्ते।
नमस्कार।
कौशल जी नमस्ते।
Okay, bye.
बहुत सुंदर।
तो आरपी सिंह साहब, मैं कब आपसे इंटरेक्शन करूं?
I'll contact you, sir. I'll
Very
contact.
well.
It's my
Thank you.
responsibility.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Thank you and namaste to everyone.
हाँ, प्रोफेसर सिंह को ढेर सारी बधाई, इतनी
नहीं
बड़ी
नहीं सर,
सफलता।
आप सबके कारण ही हुआ। एंड डॉक्टर अनुजा सिन्हा ने बहुत कोऑपरेट किया और संस्कृत सेंटर के स्टूडेंट्स भी ज्वाइन किए थे, वो भी बहुत हेल्प किए हैं। थैंक यू ऑल एवरीबॉडी, वन एंड ऑल, एंड soon we'll meet again.
Okay.
Yes,
Bye.
sir.
ठीक, नमस्ते।
Okay, sir.
नमस्ते नमस्ते।
Namaste.
When I
So
say
I'm now closing it. Yeah.
ठीक है डॉक्टर साहब, बड़ा अच्छा लगा।
ठीक
I
है,
say
बहुत अच्छा।
end, then there will be everyone will be
बलराम जी,
gone.
when are you coming to India?
देखिए अभी तो थोड़ा सा ये प्रॉब्लम हो रही ना।
अभी 1.5 लाख केसेस पर डे अभी कोविड के हो
That's
गए।
why I was wondering.
नहीं अभी तो फिलहाल I think I was thinking of coming this month, but I think that is now postponed.
Yeah. So, but you can adopt that method, being everywhere.
That's right. I think this is better.
Yeah, that's
Corona-
better, safe, and profound
Corona
also.
Corona
Yes.
cannot find me. Corona cannot find me. Corona-
Yeah.
ये ठीक।
We cannot find Corona. Corona cannot find us. It's
That's
good.
right.
कोरोना
We'll be in touch. Namaskar.